My name is Livia Arden, 48 years old. The first thing I saw was my own reflection bowed over the laptop glass, ghosted by the blue light of an unfamiliar hotel room. Then the camera adjusted. A woman crossed the screen in a blue striped shirt, my husband's shirt, the one I had ironed 3 mornings ago, while the kettle hissed and the cat pawed at my ankles. She moved with the careless ease of someone who didn't need to ask permission to be there. The collar brushed her dark hair. Somewhere beyond the frame, a faucet ran, a door clicked, and the bed behind Henry showed the rumpled geography of 2 people who hadn't bothered to smooth anything over. "Livia, are you listening?" he asked, filling the screen with his practiced smile, warmth arranged like a tie knot. "I'm listening," I said, and even I admired how steady I sounded, how clean the vowels came out, while everything inside me broke in jagged, glittering silence. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of Sunday mornings and Tuesday errands and anniversaries with photos that looked like proof, compressed into 30 seconds of evidence he didn't even try to hide. "The conference is running late," he went on, shifting just enough for me to catch a second wine glass sweating on the nightstand. "Might not be able to call tomorrow." Behind him, the woman drifted out of sight, a blur of bare legs, the shirt falling mid-thigh. The sink stopped, the door shut. My eyes cataloged what my heart refused. 2 toothbrushes by a chrome faucet, a room service tray with the lid tilted like a coin, that shirt. The strangest thing about the moment your life collapses is that it doesn't feel like thunder. It's a slow withdrawal, like a tide you didn't notice leaving until the sand is cold beneath your feet. I could have screamed, could have demanded names and rooms and explanations he'd rehearse with a litigator's poise. I could have cried until the screen blurred. Instead, a different tide surged in. Calculation. Angled light. A narrowing of the world until only the next move mattered. "Have a good night, honey," I said, sweet as a cough drop. "I love you." "Love you too, Liv. See you when I get back." The call ended. The black screen returned me to myself, a woman with cool eyes and a mouth that had stopped trembling. I watched my reflection breathe. I watched her stop being the version of me that waited to be chosen. Henry didn't know his wife had spent 15 years as a forensic accountant, the kind who could unspool lies down to their decimal places. He didn't know that for 6 months while he cultivated a new vocabulary, late depositions, surprise client dinners, flight changes. I had been quietly collecting the stray threads, the off-cycle withdrawals, the credit cards open to optimize points, the cash transactions at hotels that did not appear on any itinerary. He didn't know that I had already begun a file with tabs and timestamps and photographs. The truth is, numbers always tell on you, even when you swear you've paid them hush money. I closed the laptop gently, like setting a body down. The house around me was immaculate, curated, our house on Braden Court that magazines had praised for its kitchen light and calm palettes. I had chosen the white linens for the California King, the brass poles, the framed Italy photos from our 5th anniversary. I stared at the bed where we had slept 1,000 nights. My hand found a pillow and straightened it with a motion so ordinary it felt obscene. A text arrived, his tone preloaded. "Missing you already. Can't wait to get home and show you how much. Your loving husband." I typed back without hesitation. "Missing you too. The house is too quiet without you. Hurry home." It surprised me how easily the lie passed through my fingers. But then I had been studying fluency from a native speaker. The kettle clicked off by reflex. Earl Grey steamed in my mother's wedding china. I sat at the kitchen island and drank purpose. It slid into me cold and clarifying. Henry liked games. Fine. He had just chosen the wrong opponent. 3 days earlier, I had been the version of myself he counted on, the one who rose at 5, measured 2 sugars, and a splash of cream into his navy mug from our first Christmas, pressed his shirts crisp while the local news whispered in the background. I had packed his garment bag, the leather one I'd bought when he made senior partner, folding ties as if they were promises. "You worry too much," he said at the door, kissing my forehead with distracted affection. "It's just Chicago, in and out." I'd waved from the porch until his taillights slipped away. I'd cleaned rooms until the house gleamed like a story about us. I wish I could tell you I didn't already suspect. But suspicion is a dull ache that teaches you to ignore yourself. You stack cheerful evidence against it. "We're fine. He's stressed. The firm is growing." And you silence the ache with busy hands. The ache had a ledger. Back at my desk, Third bedroom converted into an office with a view of the hydrangeas. I opened our joint accounts. I traced patterns like constellations, restaurant charges in cities where he supposedly worked through dinner, hotels with spa services on weekdays, boutique purchases that didn't fit my size or taste. Individually, nothing screamed. Together, they formed a chorus. Then I found what all cheaters believe is clever, a burn phone receipt crumpled at the back of his desk drawer, a cheap flip model with one number saved as BD. I photographed everything, the phone, the log, the receipt with the store address and timestamp. I placed it back perfectly, as if leaving a snare unsprung teaches the animal to trust it. The night after the laptop screen, I didn't sleep much. I lay on the edge of that white bed and counted breaths, then counted months backward to the first time he'd said, "Don't wait up." 18 months. The number sat in my mouth like a metal coin. At 7 a.m., I called Virginia, the PI I trusted with other people's heartbreaks. We had a shorthand professionals use when the stakes are domestic and therefore lethal. "Livia," she said, voice going soft at the edges. "Tell me what you have." "Enough," I said, "but I want more. I want airtight. I'll put Garcia on background. We'll run surveillance next trip." I hired them off the books. I updated my will and quietly opened an account in my maiden name. I rented a storage unit across town under my mother's maiden name, too. If this sounds dramatic, understand, there's a difference between anger and intention. Anger throws plates. Intention builds a future and arranges the shards as leverage. That evening, Henry called again. The exhausted tone was perfect. "How's Chicago?" I asked, leaning against our kitchen counter, looking at the bowl of lemons I'd artfully placed the day before. "Boring as hell. Clients difficult. Depositions running long. Might stay an extra day." "That's fine," I said. "Take your time." "I miss you, Liv, more than you know." If I hadn't seen the wine glasses, the rumpled sheets, the shirt, that shirt, I would have believed him. He had always been gifted at speaking the version of truth that got him what he wanted. Many men are. Many women are trained to applaud it. "Henry," I said before he hung up, testing the sound of his name in this new air, "I love you." A beat. "I love you too." The line clicked. The quiet returned. Not empty now, but expectant. I wandered the house and let my eyes adjust to its new meaning. The photos looked staged, the throws too neat, the stainless steel gleamed like a lie. On the mantel, our wedding picture held two people who believed luck could be pressed into permanence by vows and shared debt. In the mirror over the console table, a woman looked back at me. I recognized from other kinds of cases, a woman who had moved past the first catastrophe into the chess of consequence. It startled me that I liked her. I drove to the river, parked, and watched a barge shoulder water aside. The wind off the water tasted like pennies. Somewhere a gull laughed the way gulls do, like little criminals. I thought about the first time Henry and I ate oysters at a pier we couldn't afford, how he'd told the waiter we were celebrating nothing in particular, just the fact of being in love and alive. He wasn't a monster then. That's the worst part. The monsters come later, incrementally, 1,000 small permissions until one day a shirt is buttoned over someone else's skin in a room you paid for. When I got home, the house was dark and the cat curled on the sofa arm like punctuation. I poured a glass of water and put it down without drinking. My phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize. I didn't pick up. It went to voicemail. No message. At 6:58 the next morning, the call I'd asked for came. Garcia didn't bother with a preamble. "Her name is Beverly Donovan," he said. 28, junior associate at Hartley & Associates. He's been consulting there. They've been involved at least 14 months. I held the phone tighter. The world edged. "How far along?" "Approximately 3 months. He's paying the medical bills on a separate card." The sound I made wasn't a sob. It was smaller, meaner, the sound a hinge makes when you force it past the stop. I thanked him, hung up, and put both palms flat on the cool marble of the island. The lemon bowl shone under the pendant light. I started laughing, quiet at first, then into my hands, because the absurdity had finally broken the surface. Of course there was a baby. Of course he had been building a second life while I was alphabetizing our tax records. Of course the one thing I'd wanted and didn't get had been repurposed as his redemption arc. But here's something Henry did not and might never understand. I am very, very good at turning grief into a ledger. I made a new list, not a divorce plan. Divorce is arithmetic. This would be geometry, vectors, trajectories, consequences that intersected at exactly the points he had assumed were invisible. I pictured the calm face I would wear while I set the table with our wedding china, the way the candles would throw warm light on a conversation that would end a life and start mine. I pictured the moment he would understand the rules had changed, and that the woman across from him knew all of his passwords and a few of his secrets he hadn't even found names for. Outside, a delivery truck eased past, brakes whispering. The hydrangeas were just beginning to turn that late summer papery blue. I stood very still and understood that I was no longer waiting for him to come home. I was preparing a place for the truth to sit down. 3 days before the blue shirt and the laptop screen, I was still the kind of wife who believed that precision could hold a marriage together. I rose before dawn, boiled water, measured 2 spoonfuls of sugar and a splash of cream into his navy mug, the one his mother gave us our first Christmas. I pressed his shirts until the seams looked military. I folded socks into pairs so tight they stayed clenched in drawers for weeks. When Henry walked through the kitchen that Tuesday morning, I had already zipped his garment bag. Leather, polished, the gift I bought when he made senior partner. I asked the same question I always asked before he left. "You sure you have everything?" He smiled without looking. "You worry too much. It's Chicago, Liv. 3 days, in and out." He kissed my forehead with distracted affection, like he was already somewhere else. I followed him to the door. He loaded his car with the precision of a man who thought organization was a virtue. I waved from the porch as he backed out of the driveway. The taillights turned the curve, and I was left with silence. That day I cleaned every room. The counters gleamed, the windows shone, the house became a museum to stability. I didn't know then how empty those perfect rooms would soon feel. When the call ended that Thursday night and the screen went black, I walked those same rooms again. The 4 bedrooms, the polished floors, the Better Homes and Gardens kitchen. All of it suddenly looked curated for a brochure, not a life. Every photo on the walls mocked me. His grin at Rachel's graduation, my half smile at mine, vacations where I looked more like a visitor than a daughter of this family. In our bedroom, the California king lay in crisp white linens, pillows arranged in careful symmetry. I stared at the space where he had slept beside me every night. How many times had he touched my shoulder while planning escapes? How many kisses carried the ghost of someone else's perfume? The woman in his shirt looked young, late 20s maybe. Effortless beauty, the kind that doesn't need makeup. Everything I had been once before years of loyalty softened my hips and etched fine lines around my eyes. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. I expected ruin. Instead, I saw focus. My posture straightened, my mouth set. I looked like someone who had just discovered the lock on her own cell and found the key inside her pocket. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Missing you already. Can't wait to get home. Your loving husband." I stared at the message until my eyes watered. Then I typed, "Missing you too. The house is empty without you. Hurry home." The ease of the lie startled me. But fluency comes quickly when you've had a native tutor. I carried my tea to the office, the converted 3rd bedroom overlooking the hydrangeas. For 15 years, I had built a reputation on being relentless with numbers. I had exposed offshore accounts, dismantled embezzlement schemes, reconstructed records meant to vanish in flames. Yet I had never turned that focus on my own husband. Tonight, I did. Our joint accounts opened first. The charges lay in neat rows like confessions. Dinners for 2 in cities where he claimed to work until midnight. Room service tabs large enough for 2. Jewelry stores, lingerie boutiques, women's clothing purchases, timed like breadcrumbs. Not one item enough to accuse. But together, a constellation of betrayal. Then I opened his phone records. Cross-referenced numbers. That's when I saw it. Unfamiliar digits repeating at odd hours. Sometimes 5 minutes before he called me with his exhausted voice. I printed the log, pinned it to the corkboard. Finally, the drawer. I don't know what made me check it. Instinct, maybe. There, inside an old briefcase he hadn't touched in years, lay a cheap flip phone. A burner. I flipped it open. Only one contact saved. BD. The call log scrolled with dozens of conversations, each a blade. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it against the wall. I photographed it. Every angle. The receipt for the purchase, tucked into the pocket. The log itself. Then I placed it back exactly as I had found it. A trap doesn't work if the animal knows it's there. By 2 a.m., I had built a timeline that turned my stomach. The business trips had started 18 months ago. Sudden overnights, last-minute client meetings in cities we'd never discussed. Always firm paid, always plausible. But the cross-check told the truth. He wasn't clever enough to hide from someone who lived in ledgers. I made tea again. My hands didn't shake this time. I sat at the kitchen island with the china set my mother gave me and spread the evidence across the marble. Patterns emerged like ink in water. Henry thought his life was compartmentalized. In truth, he had been writing me a story in receipts and call logs. At dawn, I closed the folders and exhaled. Anger had cooled into intention. Divorce would give me half. But half was not justice. Half was permission for him to start over, bruised but breathing, with the woman who had already stolen my place. No, he needed to feel what I felt when the blue shirt appeared on my screen, the sudden vacuum, the collapse of a world. He needed to know devastation not as theory, but as experience. I called Virginia at 7. She picked up on the second ring, voice still husky from sleep. "Livia, it's been a while." "I need your help," I said, "and I need it off the books. Tell me what you've got." "Enough to bury him," I said, "but I want airtight." She paused, understanding the gravity behind my tone. "I'll bring Garcia in for background. When's his next trip?" "Next week. He thinks it's a secret. Let's make it official." By 9, I had already updated my will, opened a new account under my maiden name, and rented a storage unit across town under my mother's maiden name. Preparation wasn't panic. It was power. That night, Henry called again. His voice practiced the same fatigue. "How's Chicago?" I asked, stirring honey into tea I had no appetite for. "Boring as hell. Clients dragging depositions out. Might have to stay an extra day." "That's fine," I said. "Take your time." "I miss you, Liv, more than you know." The conviction in his voice was almost art. If I hadn't seen the truth laid out in receipts and logs, I would have believed him. I almost admired his dedication. "Henry," I said before the call ended. "Yeah? I love you." He hesitated, then delivered the line. "I love you too." The call clicked off. The house breathed silence. I stared at the photos on the mantel, our wedding day, our Italy trip, last Christmas by the tree. In every frame, my smile was genuine. I wondered when his had stopped being real. That was when the phone rang again. A different number. Garcia's voice, brisk, cutting through the air. "Her name is Beverly Donovan, 28, junior associate at Hartley and Associates. They've been involved at least 14 months. My hand tightened around the phone. "How far along?" "About 3 months. He's paying the medical bills through a separate account." The world shifted, not with thunder, but with a hinge creak that sounded permanent. When Garcia's words landed, 3 months pregnant, junior associate, her name spoken like a verdict, I felt the ground of my marriage tilt permanently. I gripped the phone so tightly I heard plastic strain. Then, calmly, I asked the only question that mattered. "Send me everything." He hesitated, voice gentling. "Livia, I've seen this before. Betrayal like this can make people reckless. Maybe give yourself some time." "Today," I interrupted. "Every receipt, every photograph, every record, I want it in my hands." I hung up before his sympathy could soften me. Sympathy was a weight I couldn't afford. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon polish and rosemary from last night's roast. I stared at the bowl of fruit under the pendant light until my vision blurred. Then I laughed, a sound sharp enough to echo, because of course it wasn't just an affair. Of course he hadn't merely stolen hours or lies. He had built a new family while pretending to live in mine. I poured the rest of my tea down the sink, watched the amber liquid swirl away. In that whirlpool, I saw it clearly. Henry wasn't clever. He was cowardly. And cowards always make mistakes. By noon, Virginia had called back. "Surveillance is active. Garcia's digging deeper. You'll have a full report soon." "Good," I said. My voice didn't shake. It felt carved in stone. That afternoon, I spread the evidence across my office desk. Pages, printouts, photographs, credit card charges for jewelry and lingerie, apartment rent, medical payments, airline receipts that mapped a double life across state lines, the burner phone log, still warm in my memory. When arranged chronologically, the pattern became undeniable. Henry wasn't juggling one life with a fling. He was choreographing 2 entire existences. One wife who pressed shirts and poured wine in a house that looked like a catalog. One mistress who carried his child in a modest apartment across town. 2 worlds, both believing they were chosen. And at the center of it all, a man who thought himself so cunning he could balance the weight of two futures without either toppling. I sat back in my chair, fingers steepled, and realized a simple divorce would never be enough. Divorce divides assets, yes. Half for him, half for me. But what does half teach a man who gambled everything? Nothing. It lets him limp away, bruised but breathing, ready to rebuild with the very woman who helped shatter me. That wasn't justice. That was permission. Justice meant ruin. Justice meant he would wake one day to find that every corner of his life, the career he prized, the mistress he adored, the family he betrayed, the reputation he wore like armor, had been stripped away. That evening, he called again. Exhausting day, he said. His sigh weighted just right. Clients impossible. Might have to extend another night. That's fine, Henry, I said, stirring soup I wouldn't eat. Take all the time you need. I miss you, Liv, more than you know. If I hadn't been staring at Beverly's medical bills on my desk, I might have melted. He was that convincing. But instead, I smiled into the receiver. I miss you too. Come home when you can. When the line went silent, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it The Plan. Inside, I outlined 3 branches: legal, financial, personal. Legal. Collect evidence airtight enough for divorce, alimony, damages. Contact allies at the state bar. Plant seeds with a journalist who still owed me a favor. Financial. Separate assets, secure independence, document every irregularity. Quietly build a firewall so none of his debts or schemes could touch me. Personal. Strip away his illusions. Piece by piece, reveal to him that every secret was already uncovered. Make him feel watched, cornered, powerless. I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. A part of me whispered, "This is revenge." But another, stronger part corrected, "No. This is consequence." By Friday morning, Garcia sent the first packet. Beverly's profile, her employment history, photos of her leaving Henry's car, her hand brushing her stomach in unconscious protection. I studied them the way I once studied financial statements, coldly, for patterns. She wasn't a villain. She was an accomplice by ignorance, perhaps, but still a key piece of the architecture Henry had built. At lunch, I drove downtown to a building with mirrored windows that reflected a city Henry thought belonged to him. Virginia met me in the lobby, sleek in her dark suit, eyes sharp. "It's been too long," she said, hugging me lightly. Then she leaned back, studying my face. "But I know this isn't a social call." "I need surveillance ironclad," I said. "I need background checks, photographs, everything. And I need it off the books." "Done," she said without hesitation. "But Livia, promise me you're not planning something dangerous. I've seen women throw themselves into flames when they're angry." "I'm not angry," I replied, and realized it was true. "I'm methodical." That afternoon, I made 3 more stops. First, my attorney's office, where I updated my will and established a trust under my maiden name. Second, the bank, where I opened a new account and transferred enough to secure my freedom without triggering alarms. Third, a storage facility across town. The unit smelled of dust and metal. I locked it under my mother's maiden name and stood for a moment in the dim light, breathing the scent of secrecy. By the time Henry called that evening, I was ready. "How's Chicago?" I asked, curling up with a book I wasn't reading. "Boring as hell. The client's dragging this thing out. Might be another day." "That's fine. I'm just here missing you." "I miss you too, Liv, more than you know." If I hadn't seen the photos of him and Beverly laughing outside a hotel, I might have believed him. He was that smooth, that practiced. "Henry," I said just before he hung up. "Yeah?" "No matter what happens, I want you to know everything I do. I do, because I love you." There was a pause, then his voice, cautious. "That's sweet, Liv. I love you too." After he hung up, I sat in the stillness of our home. The wedding photo on the nightstand smiled up at me. 2 people 25 years younger, believing in vows as if they were shields. That woman had been real, but she was gone now. In her place sat someone colder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. And Henry had no idea. Saturday morning, the phone rang before the sun finished climbing. Garcia's voice was stripped of preamble. "She's 3 months along. Been to medical appointments. Payments traced to a separate credit card your husband set up. He's been covering rent on her apartment, too." For a moment, silence pressed so thick it felt like snow. Then I thanked him, my tone even, and ended the call. My hand lowered the phone to the marble counter with care, like placing glass over a flame. The hydrangeas outside the kitchen window glowed with late summer blue. I stared at them until the edges blurred. Then laughter came, sudden and sharp, spilling into the quiet. Because the truth had passed absurd and landed squarely in grotesque. Henry wasn't just cheating. He was rehearsing for fatherhood in another life, while coming home to me with stories about tough clients and long depositions. I sank onto a stool at the island and let the laughter twist into something else. Resolve. By noon, my office resembled a crime scene board. Documents spread across cork and marble, stringing together Henry's betrayals in neat chronological order. Credit card statements showing jewelry in months when our budget was supposedly tight. Hotel invoices where 2 dinners were charged at once. Medical payments aligned perfectly with Beverly's appointments. Surveillance photographs of him holding doors, brushing her hand, driving her silver Honda. Piece by piece, his double life crystallized. He wasn't reckless. He was cowardly. That's worse. Reckless men eventually confess by accident. Cowards think they can finesse 2 realities forever. I touched one photograph. Henry's arm around Beverly's waist outside a boutique hotel. His smile looked almost boyish. I remembered that same smile at our anniversary in Florence when he had pulled me close near the Ponte Vecchio, whispering that he wanted to buy me something timeless. He never did. Now I knew why. I sat back. Divorce crossed my mind again, but the thought slid off me like water. Divorce would give me half. But half meant Henry kept breathing air he hadn't earned. Half meant he could cradle his mistress's belly with one hand while signing custody papers with the other. Half meant he walked away with dignity. No, this wasn't going to be division. This was going to be demolition. That afternoon, I opened a new document labeled simply, Consequences. 3 columns. Column 1, Career. Contact allies at the state bar. File a complaint citing misuse of client funds. Ensure an investigation stripped his reputation bare. Column 2, Public Image. Reach out to Amanda Foster at the Tribune, the journalist who owed me from a judicial corruption case. Seed the story of Henry's misconduct. Give her evidence airtight enough to publish without fear of libel. Column 3, Personal. Expose him in his own home. Not with rage or theatrics, but with calculated unveiling. Let him watch, piece by piece, as every secret unraveled in front of him. Let him feel cornered in a house he thought was fortress. When I finished, I leaned back in the chair, the desk light haloing the board. For the first time in months, purpose hummed through my veins like current. That night, Henry called again, his voice warm as ever. Deposition still dragging. Might be another day. That's fine, I said, flipping through photos of him and Beverly at Pike Place Market. His hand on her lower back, her smile radiant. I miss you, Liv, more than you know. If I hadn't been holding the evidence, I would have believed him. His voice carried conviction that could sell innocence to a jury. But I wasn't the jury anymore. I was the prosecutor. Miss you too, I said. Come home safe. After the call, I turned back to the wall of evidence. Beverly's profile stared at me. Age 28. Sharp jawline, dark eyes. Not evil, just young. Naive enough to believe Henry when he said he was separated. I wondered if she knew yet that she wasn't the chosen one either, just a pawn in a man's balancing act. At midnight, I poured a glass of red wine and stood in the doorway of our bedroom. The California King glowed under lamplight, linens crisp, pillows fluffed. For years, I had treated this bed as altar. Now it looked like a stage where he had rehearsed lies. I set the glass down, picked up my phone, and texted Virginia. I want full surveillance. Start tomorrow. The 3 dots blinked. Then, understood. But remember, don't let anger drive you. I typed back, not anger, precision. Sunday morning, the first surveillance photos arrived. Henry and Beverly at a cafe, leaning close, laughing like they had invented happiness. She touched her belly absently, and Henry's eyes followed her hand with something I hadn't seen in years, wonder. For a second, my throat closed, because once, long ago, I had wanted that too, a child. We had tried, failed, argued, decided against it, or at least I thought we decided. Now I realized it was only me who had closed the chapter. Henry had been waiting to reopen it, with someone else. I set the photo down. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I poured coffee, black and bitter, and wrote one more line into my consequences document. Make him watch everything collapse. By evening, the house was quiet again. I walked through the living room, past the wedding photo on the mantel, the Christmas snapshot where we looked like perfection wrapped in ribbons. I touched the glass, then turned it face down. Henry had no idea that the woman waiting for him now was not the wife he had left. She wasn't broken. She wasn't begging. She was building something far more dangerous than grief. She was building his ruin. Monday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My voice over the phone was calm, measured, convincing enough that no one would suspect the truth. I wasn't ill. I was preparing for war. By 9 o'clock, I was parked across the street from Beverly Donovan's apartment complex. It was a neat, modern building, nothing extravagant, but comfortable enough for a young attorney, especially with an older man quietly footing the bills. I sat in my car, watching through the windshield as the morning unfolded like a stage play. At 8:30 sharp, she appeared. Tall, elegant, hair loose around her shoulders, a dress that skimmed her figure and hid her pregnancy almost completely. If I hadn't known, I wouldn't have seen it. She moved with the grace of someone who had never been denied, who had no reason to doubt her place in the world. She slid into a silver Honda, practical but well kept, and drove away. When the lot emptied, I stepped out of my car and walked to the mailboxes. I didn't open hers, federal crime, but I leaned close enough to read what was visible through the thin envelopes. Credit card bills, a stack of them, with balances too high for someone at her salary. Notices from a fertility clinic, confirmation of what Garcia had already found. And one glossy envelope that caught my attention. A letter from a high-end real estate agency. Beverly was house hunting. I almost smiled. Of course she was. Of course Henry was preparing a future with her, just as he had once promised me. I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick photo of the envelope, enough to remind myself later. Then I walked back to my car, heart steady, and dialed Virginia. I need you to track real estate inquiries under Beverly Donovan's name, I said. Properties, brokers, loan applications, everything. Virginia's tone was careful. What are you planning to do with it? I want to know exactly what kind of life he thinks he's building with her, I replied, and then I want to make sure it never exists. The silence on the line stretched. Finally, she said, All right, but tread carefully, Livia. Information is power, but power misused can burn you too. I'm not misusing anything, I said flatly. I'm balancing the scale. That afternoon, I made 3 calls. Each one felt like moving a chess piece across a board only I could see. The first was to Amanda Foster at the Portland Tribune. We'd worked together years ago, uncovering a bribery scandal in the county courts. She still owed me. I might have a story for you, I said, keeping my voice steady. A respected attorney funneling client funds into personal expenses tied to an affair with a junior associate who's now pregnant. There was a sharp inhale. How solid is your evidence? Rock solid. Financial records, photographs, witness statements. I'll decide when to release it, but I want to know if you're interested. Very, she said. Call me when you're ready. The second call was to Martin Garcia, not the investigator, but another Garcia, an old friend from college who now worked at the Oregon State Bar. He handled ethics violations. Martin, I need to file a potential complaint, I said. An attorney misusing client funds for personal gain. Hypothetically, what would be the process? Depends on the details, he said, his voice careful. Send me what you have, and I'll review it discreetly. I promised him I would. The third call was the most delicate. I dialed Hartley & Associates and asked for the managing partner. My voice softened into polite composure. This is Mrs. Arden, I said when Jonathan Hartley came on the line. My husband has been consulting for your firm. I'd like to meet about a matter of potential conflict of interest. There was a long pause. I'm not sure I understand. I think it would be better discussed in person, I said. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? Another pause, heavier this time. 3 o'clock. Perfect. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, hands braced against the counter. My reflection in the microwave door looked calm, composed, almost detached. But beneath that calm, a storm was building, precise and targeted. That evening, Henry called again. How's my girl? He asked, voice honey smooth. I'm fine, I said, glancing at the thick folder of evidence spread across the counter, just thinking about us, our future. Our future? He laughed lightly, as if charmed. We've already got the best life, Liv. Maybe, I said softly, but I've been wondering lately if something's missing. Silence stretched. I imagined him frowning, rubbing the back of his neck the way he did when cornered. Let's talk about it when I get home, he said finally. This isn't a phone conversation. No, I agreed, it isn't. When the call ended, I stood in the darkness of my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. For years, I had believed comfort was safety. That silence meant peace. Now I understood differently. Silence is where rot spreads. Comfort is where lies live longest. Tomorrow, I would walk into Hartley & Associates with my briefcase full of evidence. Tomorrow, I would place photographs and billing records on a desk polished by decades of legal victories. Tomorrow, Henry would lose more than his mistress. He would lose his place in the world he thought was unshakable. Tuesday at precisely 3 o'clock, I walked through the revolving doors of Hartley & Associates. The lobby gleamed in chrome and glass, designed to impress clients into believing this was where justice lived. I clutched my leather briefcase, inside a carefully curated gallery of Henry's sins. The receptionist greeted me with professional brightness, then quickly stood when Jonathan Hartley himself appeared. Distinguished, silver-haired, his suit the shade of smoke, his handshake cool. Mrs. Arden, he said, thank you for coming. Let's talk in my office. His office was everything I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilling light onto bookshelves crammed with law tomes, mahogany desk wide enough to separate empires, and awards lined up like shields. He gestured to a leather chair. I sat, placing my briefcase on my lap, like a weapon still sheathed. What concerns you about your husband's work with this firm? His voice was polite but tight, a man cautious of landmines. I opened the briefcase and slid a photograph across the desk. Henry and Beverly, exiting a hotel in Seattle, time-stamped during one of his supposed business trips. His arm curved around her waist, her head tilted in easy intimacy. Hartley's eyes widened, the blood draining from his face. That, I said, is your consultant with one of your junior associates, taken during hours he billed to your firm. Hartley studied the image, then looked at me. Mrs. Arden, this firm has strict policies. I cut him off, laying 3 more documents across the desk. Henry's billing statements to the firm, credit card receipts for jewelry and hotel rooms, a timeline correlating payments from Hartley with his personal indulgences. This is not suggestion, I said calmly. It's fact. The question is what you intend to do about it. He read each page with the precision of a man weighing catastrophe. His jaw tightened. What do you want, Mrs. Arden? I leaned forward. I want Henry's consulting contract terminated. I want Ms. Donovan transferred out of his orbit immediately, and I want an internal review of whether client funds were misused to subsidize this affair. In exchange, this stays between us. No bar complaints, no press, no lawsuits. And if we don't agree? I slid the documents back into my briefcase. Then tomorrow morning, Amanda Foster at the Tribune runs a story about how your firm facilitated misconduct between a married consultant and his pregnant mistress. The state bar receives a complaint, and I file a civil suit against both the firm and my husband. The fallout will not be quiet. Silence stretched. Hartley's knuckles whitened around the photograph. He was a smart man. He saw the trap fully set, jaws already closed. Finally, he exhaled. I'll need time to verify these claims. Of course, I said smoothly, standing. But I'll need your answer by Friday. My husband returns tomorrow night, and I intend to have this resolved before he discovers his world has already collapsed. I left my card on his desk, turned, and walked out with steady steps. The receptionist glanced at me, curious, but I didn't falter. Outside, the September air hit my face like clarity. That night, I prepared dinner as if nothing had changed, because that was the point. Salmon with lemon butter, roasted asparagus, wild rice. I laid the table with our wedding china, candles flickering in crystal holders, a bottle of Pinot Noir breathing on the counter. To anyone looking in, it would appear a home welcoming back a husband from business. But I wasn't preparing a reunion. I was preparing a funeral. At 7:45, 15 minutes early, Henry walked through the door. He dropped his garment bag and laptop case, calling my name with rehearsed warmth. Something smells incredible, he said, kissing my cheek. I inhaled perfume that wasn't mine, clinging faintly to his shirt. "Welcome home," I said, smiling as I plated the salmon. "How was Chicago?" "Exhausting," he replied, loosening his tie. "But productive. Clients happy. We finally got the Brown case resolved." His lie rolled so smoothly I almost admired the craftsmanship. Almost. "Wash up," I said. "Dinner's ready." 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other at the candlelit table. He talked, weaving stories of meetings that never existed, clients that never breathed. His fork moved, his smile curved, and I let him perform. Finally, he set down his fork, eyeing me with practiced concern. "So, you mentioned something on the phone about children." I lifted my wine glass, met his gaze. "I've been wondering what I want from life. What would make me truly happy?" "I thought you were happy," he said quickly. For the first time, a note of genuine unease threaded his voice. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. "Are we happy, Henry?" His eyes flickered. "Of course. Why would you ask something like that?" I placed my glass down, leaned forward. "Humor me. If you could have any life, with no consequences, no limits, what would it look like? Would you still choose this? This marriage, this house, this routine?" He froze, fork halfway to his mouth, silence stretched, thick as fog. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the gallery, and slid it across the table. The photograph of him and Beverly glowed on the screen, timestamp blazing proof. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Livia," he whispered. "Don't," I said, raising a hand. My voice was steady, flat. "Don't insult me with excuses. I know. About Beverly? About the pregnancy? About the apartment? The medical bills? The jewelry? All of it." He stared at the photograph, then lifted his eyes to me. For the first time in 23 years, Henry Arden looked small. "How long have you known?" "Does it matter?" I asked quietly. "The question is, what happens now?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. His hands trembled around his fork. The confident, successful attorney I had married seemed to collapse in front of me, shrinking into something fragile, almost pitiful. And that was when I realized the most devastating weapon wasn't anger, or evidence, or revenge. It was truth, placed carefully on a dinner table set with crystal and china, delivered by the wife he thought would never find out. Henry's fork clattered against his plate. He didn't even notice. His eyes stayed locked on the photo glowing from my phone, as if staring long enough might make Beverly disappear back into the pixels. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered finally, his voice thin, fragile. "Beverly and I, it started with work. She was assigned to my cases. We spent time together, talked about the law, about life. She's brilliant, Livia. She made me feel—" I cut him off, my tone flat. "Don't romanticize this. Tell me about the pregnancy." He flinched, the word landing like a strike. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a whisper, "She told me 2 months ago. It wasn't planned. But when she said the words, He broke off, rubbed his face with both hands. "I felt joy, pure joy, something I thought I'd lost." The candlelight flickered over his features, and for the first time I saw not the polished attorney, but a man stripped of polish, trembling under the weight of what he'd built. "So you were happy," I said. "Happy she was carrying the child I once begged you to give me." He lowered his hands, eyes glistening. "Livia, please." I leaned forward, my voice cutting. "And what then? You started looking at houses?" His head snapped up. "How did you—" "I told you," I said evenly. "I know everything." His breath hitched. He stared at me like I was a stranger, as though the woman across the table couldn't possibly be the wife he'd known for 23 years. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked softly. "Or were you going to keep living this double life until one day you simply vanished?" The silence stretched so long I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, in a broken voice, he said, I thought I could make it work. Both lives. Both of you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You thought you could split yourself into 2 men, husband here, father there. Do you realize how insane that sounds?" "I didn't know what else to do," he said desperately. "I love her. I love the idea of the baby. But I also— God, Livia, I love you. I couldn't bear losing either of you." I stood, lifting our wedding china plates from the table. My movements were steady, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Congratulations," I said coldly. "You've managed to lose both." His chair scraped back as he followed me into the kitchen. "What does that mean?" It means, I said, setting the plates in the sink with a careful clink, that Beverly Donovan's career at Hartley ended yesterday, along with your consulting contract. He went pale. What are you talking about? I faced him fully, letting the words land one by one. I had a very productive meeting with Jonathan Hartley. He was disturbed to learn one of his consultants was billing hours he didn't work while conducting an affair with a junior associate. Apparently, violating firm policy is frowned upon. Your reputation? It collapsed in his office before you even walked through this door. He staggered back, one hand braced against the counter. You can't do this. My career. Your career? I laughed, the sound harsh, jagged. Your career died the moment you decided to live a lie. I'm just writing the obituary. He shook his head, panic flooding his face. What do you want? Money? The house? I'll give you anything in the divorce. This isn't about divorce, I said quietly, stepping closer until he could see the steel in my eyes. This is about consequences. For 23 years, I had stood at his side, his partner, his supporter, the silent architect of his life. I had pressed his shirts, carried his secrets, built him into the man he presented to the world. And in return, he had turned me into a fool. Now I was finished playing the part. He reached for me then, desperation trembling in his fingers. I can fix this, Livia. I'll end things with Beverly. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't destroy me like this. I stared at him, my voice a whisper, edged with iron. She's pregnant, Henry. You can't erase that. You can't undo it. You can't unmake the life you started with her. I'll support the baby, he stammered, but I don't have to be involved. I can choose us. Stop, I said sharply, my hand raised. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about abandoning your unborn child like it's a line item in a budget. What kind of man does that make you? He wilted then, sagging against the counter, eyes wide and lost. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Beneath the charm, beneath the arrogance, beneath the polished veneer, my husband was nothing but a frightened, selfish man who thought love could be juggled like cases in court. I don't know, he whispered. I don't know what kind of man I am anymore. I turned away, reaching for the dish towel, steadying myself. That's the first honest thing you've said in months. The candles flickered in the dining room, burning low. The salmon sat untouched, the wine warm in its glasses. In that moment, I knew the marriage had ended long before tonight. I was simply delivering the eulogy. Thursday morning, the phone rang just as the sun lifted over the rooftops. I recognized the number instantly, though I had never dialed it myself. This is Beverly Donovan, the young voice said, trembling at the edges. We need to talk. I had been expecting the call. Still, my pulse kicked, sharp as a blade. Good morning, Beverly. What can I do for you? Not over the phone, she replied quickly. In person. There are things you need to know about Henry. We agreed on neutral ground. A cafe downtown, public enough that neither of us held home advantage. As I drove, I wondered what she thought she could tell me. After all, I already had his receipts, his photos, his timelines, but curiosity thrummed in my veins. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. I spotted her immediately in a corner booth, looking smaller than the woman in the surveillance photos. Pregnancy softened her, gave her a glow that no amount of sorrow could dim. Yet her eyes were rimmed red, her hands trembling as she clutched her cup. Thank you for coming, she said when I slid into the seat opposite her. You said there were things I needed to know, I replied. I'm listening. She inhaled, deep and shaky. When I met Henry, he told me he was separated. He said you and he were only staying legally married because of financial complications. He told me you were living separate lives. My jaw tightened. And you believed him? She nodded, tears glistening. I wanted to. He was charming, successful, older. He made me feel like I was special. When he said he loved me, when he started talking about a future together, I believed him. I thought I had found my happy ending. When did you find out the truth? I asked. Her voice cracked. 3 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator because he never wanted me to call him at home, never wanted to meet near your neighborhood. The PI told me you were still married, still sharing a bed, still attending events together. When I confronted Henry, he swore he was going to leave you soon. He said he just needed time to figure out how to protect you financially. I laughed then, a dry, bitter sound. He painted me as fragile, as some housewife who couldn't survive on her own. She blinked at me. You're not? I'm a forensic accountant, I said coldly. I've put CEOs in prison. I've tracked millions through shell corporations. Fragile is the last word anyone should use for me. Beverly's tears spilled over. He lied to both of us. I thought I was the woman he chose. Now I see I was just convenient. She reached into her purse and placed a manila envelope on the table. These are copies of everything: texts, emails, voicemails, 14 months of promises, promises he never intended to keep. Some of them are about you, ugly things. I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it yet. Why give this to me? Her hand shook as she wiped her cheeks. Because I don't want him to walk away clean. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can help make sure he faces consequences. And what about you? I asked, tilting my head. What about the baby? She swallowed hard. I'll raise this child, with or without him. But he won't get to live two lives anymore, not after what he's done to us both. For the first time, she met my eyes directly. And in hers, I didn't see a rival. I saw another victim, another woman, caught in Henry's web of arrogance and cowardice. I picked up the envelope and slid it into my purse. Thank you, Beverly. Whatever else happens, know this. You aren't my enemy. He is. Relief flickered across her face. That means more than you know. When I drove home, the city shimmered with late afternoon haze. The envelope sat heavy in my bag, not just paper, but leverage, proof, ammunition. Now I had more than evidence. I had an ally. Henry had thought he could balance us like scales. Instead, he had created two women united against him. That evening, when he walked through the door, suitcase in hand, he looked at me with the same polished smile he had used for months. But something in his eyes flickered. When he saw my calm expression, the stillness in my posture, instinct maybe. Predators recognize when the prey has stopped running. How was your day? He asked cautiously. Interesting, I said, sipping my tea. I had coffee with Beverly Donovan. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. Livia, I can explain. Can you? I interrupted. Can you explain why you told her I was fragile, that I couldn't survive without you? Can you explain why you promised to marry her, promised her a future while still sharing my bed? Can you explain why you said you loved her more than you'd ever loved anyone in your life? He sank into the chair across from me, eyes hollow, shoulders sagging. She gave you the messages, he whispered. All of them, I confirmed. 14 months' worth. Every lie, every promise, every insult. Quite a collection. His eyes lifted to mine, glassy with despair. What are you going to do? I closed my book, folded my hands on the table, and looked him directly in the eye. I'm going to ask you one question, I said, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. In all of this, the lying, the cheating, the deception, did you ever once consider that your actions might have consequences? He opened his mouth, closed it again. The silence pressed in. Finally, he whispered, I thought I was smart enough to manage it all. I stood, moving to the window, staring out at the twilight pressing against the glass. Well, I said softly, you were wrong. And now you'll learn what happens when the women you've deceived stop playing your game. Friday morning, I woke before dawn. The house was hushed, but my pulse drummed like a warning bell. Today would be the first strike Henry actually felt. Until now, he had coasted inside the illusion of control. By tonight, that illusion would be gone. At 8:30, the first call came. Martin Garcia, Oregon State Bar. His voice was official, clipped. Mrs. Arden, I've reviewed the evidence you submitted. We're opening a formal investigation into your husband's billing practices and potential misuse of client funds. Thank you, Martin, I said, keeping my voice even. He hesitated, then softened. Livia, once this begins, there's no going back. His career could be permanently damaged. I'm sure, I said. The second call arrived mid-morning. Amanda Foster, from the Tribune. My editors cleared the piece, she said. We'll run it tomorrow, both print and digital. Names withheld for now, but the details are enough for anyone in the legal community to recognize Henry. Good, I replied. There's something else, she added. When I started asking questions, I got tips. Other attorneys mentioned irregularities with Henry's work. This might not be his first time. The words hit like a cold blade. Other women, other lies, other betrayals I had been too trusting or too blind to see. My fingers tightened around the phone. Print what you have, I said. Let the world connect the dots. By noon, the third call arrived. Jonathan Hartley himself. His tone was grave. Mrs. Arden, we've concluded our review. Henry's consulting contract is terminated effective immediately. Ms. Donovan has been placed on leave pending our internal investigation. Thank you, I said. There's more, Hartley continued. We uncovered discrepancies in Henry's billing that extend back several years. We'll be conducting a full audit. Of course you will, I murmured. When the call ended, I set the phone down and stared at the documents spread across my desk. Piece by piece, the empire Henry thought untouchable was falling. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed again, this time his number. Livia, he barked as soon as I answered. His voice was ragged, strained. Garcia from the bar just called me. How could you? You're my wife. The same way you lied to me for 14 months, I said, my voice cool, easily. This will destroy me, my reputation, my career, everything I've built. Everything you built? I laughed softly. Henry, I built it with you. I pressed your shirts, entertained your clients, played the perfect wife while you siphoned money into a second life. Don't lecture me about destruction. I can fix this, he pleaded. Please, just call it off. We can work through this. There is no we anymore, I said sharply. You made sure of that when you chose Beverly and her child every day for over a year. I never chose her over you. Really? My voice turned razor-edged. Then why did you promise to marry her? Why did you tour houses with her? Why did you tell her you loved her more than anyone in your life? His silence told me everything. Listen carefully, Henry, I continued. This afternoon you'll be served with divorce papers. I'm asking for the house, the investments, the retirement accounts, alimony, and damages. And before you think of fighting me, remember, Beverly is prepared to testify. Every promise you made her is evidence of intent to defraud. You won't just lose me. You'll lose everything. There was a broken sound on the other end, half sob, half growl. Then he hung up. By 4, his car pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window as he sat inside for a long minute, shoulders slumped, before finally stepping out. He carried a thick envelope in his hand. Inside, he dropped it on the counter. Divorce papers, he said bitterly. I can't believe you actually filed them. What did you expect? I asked. I expected the woman I married, he spat. The woman who loved me enough to work through problems instead of destroying me at the first chance. I stared at him, astonished. Problems? You didn't give me problems to solve, Henry. You gave me lies to uncover. You didn't give me a marriage to save. You gave me a deception to expose. Don't you dare call that a problem. He deflated then, sagging against the counter, his eyes rimmed red. What happens now? Now? I said quietly. Now you face consequences. You find somewhere else to live. You hire an attorney. You learn what it feels like to rebuild from ruins. And you do it without me. Livia, he whispered, tears spilling. Is there any chance, any possibility, that someday we could be friends? I studied him. The man who had held me when my mother died, who had celebrated our anniversaries, who had danced with me in kitchens late at night. That man was real, once. But he had been buried beneath lies, and what stood before me now was a stranger. Friends don't lie for 14 months, I said softly. Friends don't gaslight each other into doubting reality. So no, Henry, we won't be friends. His mouth worked soundlessly. Finally he nodded, picked up his bag, and walked to the door. He turned once, eyes wet. I did love you, Livia. Whatever you think, I did. I held his gaze, steady as steel. Love without honesty isn't love. It's just sentiment, and sentiment can't build a life. When the door closed, silence wrapped the house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt clean. 6 weeks later, I stood in the courthouse lobby, waiting for the hearing that would formally dissolve 23 years of marriage. The air was thick with the scent of floor polish and nerves, voices bouncing off marble walls. My heels clicked as I paced the length of the corridor, briefcase in hand, evidence neatly organized inside, though by now every page was burned into my memory. Across the hall, Beverly sat on a wooden bench near the windows, her pregnancy impossible to hide now beneath the loose folds of her black dress. She cradled her stomach unconsciously, her expression equal parts weary and determined. We had become unlikely allies, bonded by betrayal, united by our desire to see Henry answer for his choices. How are you feeling? I asked, taking the seat beside her. Nervous, she admitted, but ready. I just want this to be over. Have you heard from him? She shook her head. Not since you told him I was moving to Sacramento. And you? I allowed myself a humorless smile. He sent flowers on what would have been our anniversary. No note. Just lilies. I threw them away. Before she could respond, the doors opened. Henry arrived, right on time, flanked by his attorney. He looked like a shadow of himself. His suit hung loose on his thinner frame, his eyes hollow, his once confident stride faltering. The man who had once commanded courtrooms now looked like someone awaiting his own sentencing. His lawyer, Patterson, wasted no time. She approached me before the hearing began, her tone brisk but edged with desperation. Mrs. Arden, my client is prepared to offer you 60% of all assets plus alimony for 10 years. In exchange, you'll withdraw cooperation with the state bar investigation. I didn't even need to confer with my attorney. No. Be reasonable, Patterson pressed. You're asking for everything. I'm asking for what the law entitles me to, I said evenly. Half of our community property, alimony based on the lifestyle I maintained for 23 years, and damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The bar investigation is separate, and it will proceed regardless of what happens here. Her mouth tightened. She knew she had nothing to bargain with. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings moved swiftly. Henry didn't contest the divorce. His lawyer must have advised him that any fight would only expose him further. The judge, a stern woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, listened as my attorney presented the evidence, then turned to Beverly. On the stand, Beverly's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone. Henry Smith promised to divorce his wife and marry me. He told me he loved me more than anyone he'd ever loved. We looked at houses together, talked about raising children, planned a wedding. When I became pregnant, he was overjoyed. But the moment his wife discovered our relationship, he told me I was a mistake, that I misunderstood, that it needed to end. The courtroom shifted, a ripple of murmurs and side glances. The judge fixed Henry with a look of open disapproval. Mr. Arden, do you contest this testimony? Henry's attorney whispered something frantically in his ear. His shoulders slumped. No, Your Honor. The judge's verdict was swift. Based on the evidence, I find Mr. Arden engaged in a deliberate pattern of deception that caused significant emotional distress to both his wife and Ms. Donovan. Mrs. Arden is awarded 75% of all community property, alimony of $8,000 per month for 15 years, and $50,000 in damages. The gavel struck. Final. Irrevocable. A hush settled in my chest. Not relief, not triumph, but something quieter. Justice, maybe. Balance restored, even if imperfectly. Afterward, Henry lingered in the corridor, his face ashen. When I passed, he stopped me with a hand on the wall. I hope you're satisfied, he said bitterly. Actually, I replied, my voice calm, I am. For the first time in over a year, I feel like the world makes sense again. You've destroyed my life, he spat. No, Henry, I said, meeting his eyes one last time. You destroyed your own. I just refused to let you destroy mine in the process. I left him standing there, Beverly trailing behind me. Outside, the spring sunlight cut sharp and bright against the courthouse steps. She touched my arm. What will you do now? She asked. I'm thinking about starting my own forensic accounting firm, I said, helping other women like us, women who suspect their husbands of financial infidelity but don't know where to begin. I have the skills. Now I have the fire. That sounds perfect, she said softly. You'll help a lot of people. And you? I asked. My sister's waiting for me in Sacramento, she said, her hand protective over her stomach. She'll help with the baby. I might go back to school, start fresh. We hugged then, two women who should have been enemies but had become something closer to sisters in survival. As I drove home, I thought of the house I would return to. My house. No longer a museum to a marriage, but a blank canvas for the life I would build alone. For the first time in decades, the silence there would not be suffocating. It would be mine. 1 year later, I sat in my new office surrounded by files, monitors, and the quiet hum of a business I had built from ashes. Arden Forensics had grown faster than I imagined. What began as a single desk in a rented co-working space had expanded into a thriving firm specializing in uncovering financial infidelity. Women came to me with suspicions, half-whispered fears, and I armed them with the truth. Spreadsheets that exposed double lives, bank statements that shattered illusions. Each case reminded me of the night I saw Henry's reflection framed by betrayal. Each time I helped someone else, I stole another fragment of his power back for myself. On my desk sat a glossy magazine, folded open to an article headlined, "Turning Betrayal into Business." My face, smiling but serious, stared back from the page. The writer had called me the accountant who makes cheaters pay. I preferred to think of myself as an interpreter, someone who translated lies into numbers until they confessed. My phone buzzed with a text from a number saved under R. Saw the article. Congratulations. You deserve every success. It was Beverly. Over the past year, we had become something strange but solid. Co-conspirators who had survived the same storm. She had moved to San Francisco, finished her MBA, and sent me photos of her daughter, Emma. In the last picture, Emma stood wobbly on new legs, curls sticking up like static, her eyes fierce and stubborn. I texted back, "Thank you, how are you both?" Her reply came quick. "Better than ever. Emma's stubborn as hell. She refuses to accept help from anyone. Reminds me of someone I know." I smiled. Yes, I could already see it. The same steel threaded through Emma's tiny bones that had pulled both her mother and me through the wreckage. Another text followed. "Have you heard anything about Henry?" I hesitated before replying. Through the professional grapevine, I knew more than I wanted. The bar had suspended his license for 2 years after their audit uncovered a decade of irregularities. The Tribune had published follow-up articles linking him to other questionable relationships. He was no longer the commanding attorney who strode into courtrooms with charm as armor. He was now a paralegal in a small firm across the river in Vancouver, Washington, shuffling papers under someone else's command. "He's alive," I finally wrote. "That's about all I know." "That's more than I need," she replied. "I hope he's learned something from all this." I doubted it. Men like Henry rarely learned. They rationalized, rewrote, convinced themselves they were victims of circumstance. But that was no longer my concern. I set the phone down and leaned back, watching the afternoon sunlight stripe across my office floor. A year ago, I had been a wife unraveling under betrayal. Today, I was a business owner, a survivor, a woman whose silence had transformed into a voice others could lean on. The greatest lesson I had learned wasn't about betrayal, it was about freedom. That love without honesty is only sentiment. That trust without truth is just self-delusion. That a life built on someone else's lies isn't a life at all. Henry thought he had destroyed me when he chose Beverly. Instead, he had given me back myself. And I was still rising.